You're sitting in a boardroom, surrounded by colleagues all desperately trying to prove their worth. Voices overlap. Ideas clash. Everyone's fighting for attention. The energy is chaotic, almost frantic. You watch as person after person jumps in, each one trying to sound smarter than the last. And then something strange happens. The person at the end of the table, the one who hasn't said a word, leans back in their chair. They don't interrupt. They don't compete. They simply observe. And somehow, without speaking, they become the most powerful person in the room. 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli discovered something about this exact scenario that terrified the most powerful rulers of his time. He found that the person who speaks the least often commands the most respect. And this wasn't just theory. This was a carefully observed strategy that could make or break empires. In Renaissance Italy, where one wrong word could mean exile or death, Machiavelli noticed something that the history books don't tell you. The courtiers who survived, who thrived, who built lasting power, they weren't the ones giving grand speeches or engaging in clever debates. They were the ones who mastered what he called the art of strategic silence. This strategy was so effective, so psychologically devastating to opponents, that it was considered too dangerous to teach openly. Because when you understand how silence works as a weapon, you don't just earn respect, you force it. So what did Machiavelli discover about the psychology of power that made silence more terrifying than any sword? And why? In our modern world of constant noise and endless chatter, has this ancient strategy become even more powerful? Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. What you're about to learn is a forgotten strategy that reshaped kingdoms and could reshape how people see you. Subscribe now, and let's unlock the forbidden playbook Machiavelli never meant for the masses. Most people have it completely backwards when it comes to earning respect. They believe that respect comes from speaking up, from proving their intelligence, from winning debates and dominating conversations. They think that the loudest voice in the room is the most powerful voice. But Machiavelli observed something completely different in the treacherous courts of Renaissance Italy. But why do people desperately seek respect in the first place? Machiavelli identified 3 fatal patterns that destroy your power before you even realize it. First, there's what I call validation hunger. You've seen this person. Maybe you've been this person. They constantly need to prove their worth through words. Every meeting, every conversation becomes an opportunity to demonstrate how smart they are, how much they know, how valuable their opinion is. But here's the trap. The more you speak to prove yourself, the more you reveal your desperation. Second, there's a fear of invisibility. People believe that silence equals weakness, that if they're not constantly contributing, they'll be forgotten or overlooked. So they fill every pause, comment on every topic, make sure their voice is always heard. But what they don't realize is that by trying to be everywhere, they become nowhere. Their words lose all weight because there are simply too many of them. Third, there's the competition trap. In our modern world, we've been conditioned to think that conversation is a competition, that we need to outtalk others to establish dominance. We interrupt, we one-up, we make sure we get the last word. But Machiavelli saw that this kind of verbal warfare actually weakens your position. When you're competing for attention, you've already lost a game. And here's the devastating truth that most people never realize. The more you talk, the more you reveal your insecurities, your fears, your desperate need for approval. Every word becomes evidence of your weakness, not your strength. Machiavelli discovered what I call the respect paradox. The loudest person in the room is often the least respected. The quiet person, the one who speaks rarely but with precision, commands attention the moment they open their mouth. Why? Because they've mastered the principle of scarcity. Think about it. When someone speaks constantly, their words become background noise. But when someone who rarely speaks finally says something, everyone stops and listens. That's not coincidence. That's psychology. That's power. So what exactly did Machiavelli discover that was so dangerous? To understand this, we need to go beyond The Prince, the book everyone knows, and dive into his real lessons on psychological dominance. Most people think Machiavelli was just about political manipulation and ruthless tactics. But his true genius lay in understanding human psychology at the deepest level. He spent years observing the courts of Florence, watching how power actually moved from person to person. And what he discovered was revolutionary. He noticed that the most powerful people were the ones who controlled information. They spoke little, observed much, and when they finally did speak, their words carried the weight of empires. True power operates on a simple principle. The one who controls information controls everything. And silence? Silence is the ultimate form of information control. Think about it this way. While everyone else is talking, competing, revealing their strategies and weaknesses, you're gathering intelligence. You're learning who wants what, who fears what, who's aligned with whom. You become the person who knows more than anyone else in the room, but reveals less than anyone else. This creates what Machiavelli called the information asymmetry advantage. You know their cards, but they don't know yours. You understand their motivations, but yours remain mysterious. You can predict their moves, but they can't predict yours. But here's where it gets really interesting. This strategy doesn't just work in Renaissance courts. It works everywhere. In modern boardrooms, in social situations, in negotiations, anywhere human psychology is involved. Picture this. You're in a meeting where everyone's trying to impress the boss. People are interrupting each other, competing for airtime, desperately trying to prove their value. But there's one person who sits back, listens, takes notes, and only speaks when directly asked. And when they do speak, their words are measured, thoughtful, precise. Who do you think the boss remembers? Who do you think gets a promotion? Who do you think commands a real respect? The answer is obvious. But most people never figure it out because they're too busy trying to be heard to understand the power of being silent. Machiavelli's insight was this. Respect isn't something you earn by proving yourself. It's something you command by controlling the flow of information. And the most powerful way to control information? Strategic silence. This is why the strategy was forbidden. Because once you understand how to use silence as a weapon, you don't just participate in the game, you control it. So how exactly does silence force respect? Machiavelli identified 4 specific ways that strategic silence becomes a psychological weapon. First, there's a scarcity principle. We value what is rare. When someone speaks constantly, their words become worthless, like currency that's been printed too much. But when someone speaks rarely, each word carries weight. People lean in when you talk because they know you don't waste words. Second, silence creates psychological tension. Humans are wired to fill empty spaces, including conversational ones. When you remain silent, others feel compelled to fill that void. They start talking more, revealing more, giving you more information to work with. Your silence literally forces them to expose themselves. Third, there's what psychologists call the authority assumption. We automatically assume that quiet confidence equals competence. The person who doesn't feel the need to prove themselves must already be secure in their power. This isn't conscious, it's instinctive. Fourth, and this is the most dangerous, silence gives you information control. While everyone else is talking, you're learning. You discover who's insecure, who's ambitious, who's afraid, who's lying. You become the person who knows the most while revealing the least. But Machiavelli's strategy isn't just about staying quiet. It's about strategic silence, knowing exactly when to speak and when to hold back. He identified 3 pillars of this approach. First pillar, observe first. Never be the first to reveal your position. Let others show their cards while you gather intelligence. The person who speaks first gives everyone else the advantage of knowing their strategy. Second pillar, speak last. After everyone has exhausted their arguments, after all the positions are clear, then and only then do you reveal your thoughts. By this point, you understand the entire landscape, and your words can be precisely calculated for maximum impact. Third pillar, choose your moments. When you finally do speak, make it count. Don't waste your words on small talk or meaningless contributions. Save your voice for the moments when it can shift the entire dynamic of the conversation. This is how you turn silence into a weapon. And the most powerful leaders in history understood this instinctively. Let me tell you about Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. He was arguably the most powerful man in Renaissance Florence, and Machiavelli had the chance to observe his techniques firsthand. Lorenzo ruled Florence during one of its most dangerous periods. He was surrounded by rivals, conspirators, and enemies who would kill him without hesitation if they saw weakness. In the council meetings of Florence, every word was a potential weapon, every sentence a possible trap. But Lorenzo had mastered something remarkable. He was legendary for his strategic silence in these meetings. While others argued, schemed, and competed for attention, Lorenzo would sit quietly, his eyes moving from speaker to speaker, absorbing every word, every gesture, every tell. Here's what made him so powerful. He never reacted immediately. When someone proposed a policy, when rivals challenged his decisions, when crises emerged, Lorenzo's first response was always silence. He would pause, think, observe the reactions of others, and only then would he speak. The most famous example of this came during the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478. The Pazzi family, backed by the Pope himself, attempted to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother during Easter Mass. They killed his brother, but Lorenzo survived. Florence was in chaos. Rumors were flying, and everyone expected Lorenzo to react with fury, with immediate retaliation. But Lorenzo did something unexpected. He remained silent. For days, while his enemies waited for his response, while his allies pressed for action, Lorenzo said nothing. He observed. He listened. He gathered information. And then when he finally acted, his response was so precise, so calculated, so devastating that it crushed the conspiracy completely. He didn't need to shout or threaten. His measured response, delivered after careful silence, carried more weight than any angry speech ever could. Machiavelli was fascinated by this approach. He noted that Lorenzo's power came not from his words, but from his ability to control when and how he used them. People hung on his every word precisely because those words were so rare. This is the first lesson of strategic silence. Let others exhaust themselves while you gather strength. Lorenzo understood that the person who reacts first is usually the person who loses. Now let's see how this ancient strategy works in the modern world. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, is perhaps the most respected investor alive, and his approach to communication is pure Machiavelli. Buffett is famous for speaking very rarely about his investments. While other investors are constantly on TV, giving interviews, making predictions, Buffett maintains what he calls strategic silence. He speaks publicly only once a year at his annual shareholder meeting, and even then, his words are carefully chosen. Here's what makes this so powerful. Because Buffett speaks so rarely when he does speak, the entire financial world listens. His annual letters to shareholders move markets. His casual comments at the annual meeting can shift billions of dollars in stock prices. Why? Because his words are scarce, and scarcity creates value. But there's something deeper happening here. Buffett's silence isn't just about scarcity. It's about information control. While other investors are constantly revealing their strategies, their fears, their predictions, Buffett reveals almost nothing. He gathers information from the market, from other investors, from economic indicators, but he keeps his own cards close to his chest. The most dramatic example came during the 2008 financial crisis. While other investors were panicking, making public statements, trying to calm markets with words, Buffett said almost nothing. He observed. He waited. He analyzed. And then when the moment was right, he acted. He made strategic investments that seemed crazy at the time, but turned out to be brilliant. His quiet confidence during the crisis actually helped stabilize markets more than any government statement could have. This is the modern application of Machiavelli's strategy. In a world of constant noise, constant commentary, constant opinion, the person who speaks rarely but with precision commands automatic respect. Buffett understands what Machiavelli knew. The person who controls information controls power. And silence is the ultimate form of information control. So, why does this strategy work so effectively? First, there's what psychologists call the cognitive bias of scarcity. Our brains are wired to value things that are rare. When someone speaks constantly, our minds categorize their words as abundant and therefore less valuable. But when someone speaks rarely, each word carries premium value. This isn't conscious, it's instinctive. We can't help but pay more attention to the person who speaks less. It's the same reason why luxury brands limit production, why exclusive restaurants have long waiting lists, why the most respected experts often say, "I don't know more than others." Second, there's a phenomenon of social proof. When we see others treating someone with deference, we automatically assume that person deserves it. When someone speaks rarely, others naturally lean in to listen. This creates a cycle. The more others respect a silent person, the more we feel we should too. Third, there's what's called the authority bias. We automatically assume that people who don't feel the need to prove themselves must already be secure in their position. Confidence is attractive, and nothing signals confidence like the ability to remain silent when others are desperately trying to be heard. But here's the most important psychological principle. Silence creates what researchers call information asymmetry. The person who talks reveals their thoughts, their fears, their strategies. The person who listens learns all of this without revealing anything about themselves. This gives the silent person a massive advantage. They know how others think, but others don't know how they think. They can predict behavior, but their own behavior remains unpredictable. They hold all the cards while others play with their hands exposed. But before you start thinking that silence is always the answer, let me share something crucial that you need to understand. Strategic silence doesn't mean permanent withdrawal. Even a master of psychological warfare knew that sometimes you must speak, sometimes you must act, sometimes you must reveal your power. The genius of Machiavelli's approach wasn't about avoiding all conflict. It was about choosing your battles with surgical precision. In The Prince, he writes about the necessity of decisive action when the moment demands it. The key is knowing when that moment has arrived. So, when should you break your strategic silence? Machiavelli identified several critical situations. First, when your silence might be interpreted as weakness rather than strength. If others start to see your restraint as inability to act, then silence becomes a liability. Sometimes you must demonstrate your power to maintain it. Second, when you need to establish dominance in crucial moments. There are times when leadership requires you to step forward, to make the difficult decision, to be the voice that others follow. Strategic silence prepares you for these moments. It doesn't eliminate them. Third, when information warfare requires strategic revelation. Sometimes the most powerful move is to reveal exactly what you know, when you know it, and how you know it. This can be more devastating than any weapon. Fourth, when your words can shift the entire power balance. If you've gathered enough information, if you've waited for the right moment, if you've calculated the perfect response, then breaking your silence can be like detonating a bomb. History's greatest communicators understood this balance. Churchill knew when to inspire with words and when to let his silence speak. JFK understood when to charm and when to intimidate through restraint. Martin Luther King Jr. knew when to speak with passion and when to let the power of his presence carry the message. This is a sophisticated balance that Machiavelli mastered. He understood that true power comes from controlling the rhythm of engagement. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, sometimes you disappear entirely, but you always choose. You're never forced into a reaction. The person who masters this balance doesn't just earn respect, they command it. So here we are at the end of our journey through Machiavelli's forbidden strategy. And I want you to understand something crucial. This knowledge was hidden for a reason. When you master strategic silence, you change the fundamental dynamics of every interaction you have. You stop being someone who reacts to the world and become someone who shapes it. Think about the most respected people in your life. I guarantee they're not the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who speak with purpose, who choose their moments, who understand that true power lies not in proving yourself, but in controlling the conversation itself. Tonight, I want you to start practicing the Machiavellian pause. Tomorrow, implement the strategic silence. This week, watch how others begin to defer to you in ways they never have before. And remember this fundamental truth. The one who speaks the least often commands the most respect. But this is just the beginning. Machiavelli understood dozens of psychological strategies that were considered too dangerous for public knowledge. The manipulation of loyalty, the psychology of fear, the art of making enemies destroy themselves. These are the tools that built and destroyed empires. As Machiavelli himself wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Your strategic silence creates mystery, and mystery creates respect. People will start to assume you know more than you're saying, that you're more powerful than you appear, that you're someone worth listening to. And here's the beautiful irony. By saying less, you'll actually communicate more. By holding back, you'll draw people in. By mastering silence, you'll discover the true power of words. So take this forbidden knowledge and use it wisely. Practice the art of strategic silence. Master the Machiavellian pause. Control the flow of information. And watch as respect stops being something you beg for and becomes something you command. The choice is yours. You can continue fighting for attention like everyone else, or you can step into the shadows and pull the strings. You can keep talking and reveal everything, or you can master silence and control everything. If you want to discover more psychological strategies that shaped history, more forbidden knowledge that was hidden from the masses, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the most powerful ideas in human history were never meant to be shared openly. Stay sharp, stay powerful, and remember, true power is silent.